So before we dive in and start to add surface detail to our female model, I thought it would be a good idea to just use this video to introduce you to the paint displacement tools and the brush editor, the various brushes available, and just show you the basics of what each one does, how to adjust them, how to set them up, and also how to create your own brushes should the basic default ones not give you the effects that you're after. So previously we adjusted the UI, added in a few extra buttons to help us. We also adjusted the Wacom tablet and also a few other options just to get Silo and the Cintiq working hand in hand. And again, if you're just using a mouse and keyboard, that is absolutely fine. You can follow along in exactly the same way, so don't worry about that. So let's open up the brush editor and just take a look at what we are going to be working with. So here is basically all the brushes that we have at our disposal at this time. The only extra one which won't probably show up on yours is this brush down here, and all I've done is create a new brush and added in a texture in this image tab here. And all that has done is just given me an alpha map, which as you can see is just a basic black and white image, which is going to help us to pull or push details, well, more detailed elements in and out of the surface of the model. And this is great for adding specific logos or stitching or anything like that to the surface, which would take a long time to paint by hand. As you can see, it's quite a basic setup, and you're not going to get your ZBrush or Mudbox quality sculpting in Silo. There, I've said it, I'm being honest, I'm not going to dress it up and say, wow, you can use Silo instead of one of these other applications. It's not going to be true. What you do have, though, are a good set of sculpting tools which will allow you, if you've already built a model in Silo, to then add further detail to it without having to go to another application. Now, as I say, these are quite basic tools, but you can get good results from using them. And that's what I hope to do throughout this course, is just demonstrate that to you. So let's have a look at some of these brushes in action. So let's create a sphere. Now, with any sculpting, the higher resolution your model, the more detail you can add in to the surface. So at the moment, this model, as we can see, is very low resolution. So if we try and paint in between these polygons, there's nothing there for it to adjust. It will only adjust these vertices here. So we have to subdivide this model in order for us to be able to paint onto it. So we'll subdivide that, and then so it doesn't look faceted, smooth shade all, and we'll also hide the wireframe. So there, we're pretty much ready to go. All we're going to do now, activate our paint displacement, and what we have is this red circle, and this is basically showing us our current brush size. And the current brush is this push brush here. We can see from the operation it's basically a push and pull brush. Now, if we click the middle mouse button and move left and right, we can adjust the radius of our brush, and as you can see, it's updated up here. So we can make our brush larger and smaller quite easily. Similarly, if we click with the middle mouse button and move up and down, we can see the number adjusting there, and that is the strength here. So if we have it at something like 1.5, and then we just paint a stroke there, as you can see, we're adding that surface detail there. Let's say we want less strength and a smaller brush. As you can see, that's just adding us a little bit of extra detail because we've adjusted the strength and the size of the brush, basically. So that's just me just basically drawing onto the screen and onto this mesh. So that's the default operation. So if this happens, just to unsubdivide, subdivide, and that will just get rid of that. That's just one of Silo's little features. It's not a bug, it's a feature. So that's just basically painting onto the surface. If we now press Shift and draw over that, that's basically just softening for us. So that's just going to smooth those out. So already we've just done a basic, let's just increase the strength, move that over a bit, bigger brush. So there we can draw, and if we hold down Shift, we can also soften that as well, and that's just a sort of a generic smooth. Now if we want to do the opposite to drawing, we just click with the right mouse button, or in this instance, if I bring up the info, our pen is currently set so this button at the front is a right click, whereas our middle click was this button at the top. So if I do the equivalent of a right click, as you can see, that's just going to do the opposite to a left click. And again, we can just go in and soften the edges there. So there, all we've done is use the push and pull brush just to give us some very basic detail there. Now, what we'll do is we'll just work our way down these and just have a quick look at them. The smooth brush, now this just does what holding down Shift did basically. As you can see, that's just going to soften and smooth that. But again, this time you've got more control over the strength and the radius, so you can make the brush much bigger and smaller. And subdivide, just to soften that there. Now, rather than the opposite of this being to unsmooth, if you hold down, yep. So if you right click, you can see rather than it, well, I suppose adding noise is unsmoothing, isn't it? So smoothing will soften it. If I just make that brush a bit smaller, if we do the opposite, that's adding surface noise. Now it looks a bit blocky because our mesh isn't higher resolution. So let's just add another subdivision there, see how that looks. And there you can see just the opposite of smooth is just adding a bit of surface noise. And then we can just smooth that a little bit more. So that's your basic smooth brush. If we move along to move, and all this will just take the vertices and faces and just move them, just like so. We can then use the opposite to soften the edges. And all that's going to do is just move the geometry. So if we wanted a larger area of the model moving, if we enable the radius, okay, that's better. As you can see, let's just move the whole top of the model. If we adjust the radius back down, wonder if this is another feature. There we go. So just turn that radius on and off. If you get the bug where it's not updating, if we make that brush smaller, it probably won't update. That's right. So just radius on, off, and there we go. That's updated. And again, we could just go back to the smooth brush and just soften those areas. Our model's starting to look a bit weird and freaky, but this is just a demonstration model, so it doesn't really matter. So that's the move brush. Flatten, we'll just take the faces and just try to align them all so they're all pointing the same way. So if we just flatten this area here, just see if we do that a little bit more. So as you can see, it's brought those all together and aligned them all and flattened them all. And you can use this to sort of, I don't want to steal a phrase from another application, but to sort of polish the edges of a model. You know, just align those hard surface edges like so, and then we can use the smooth brush just to soften these edges here. Smudge will just, well, basically smudge and move the geometry around, and this is good for helping to just enhance creases and folds and just push and nudge elements of the model, sort of like so. You can see we can just enhance that crease under there just by using smudge, just to push those and tuck areas of the model underneath other areas. So that's smudge. Pinch will just take, rather than smooth, which will spread out the vertices, pinch will pull them together. So you can see it's pulling these in here just to enhance that crease there. Obviously, if you do it a bit too much, you may end up with these sort of artifacts around here. So let's just smooth those and soften them slightly. And again, we can use that to help us later enhance creases and folds. So finally, we have this sharp brush here. And again, this is pretty much similar to push, although it's more focused. So you can create straighter lines if we use a smaller brush. As you can see, like so. So this is more for sort of drawing your surface details. It's just a more focused version of the brush, of the push and pull. Again, we can just use soft, smooth, just to soften those areas out like so. So those are the main brushes. And as you can see up here, we've got full control over how we can adjust those. So if we wanted to create, let's create a new brush. Perhaps we want this to be like so, a sharper brush. Or maybe we want the opposite. So let's pull that down here. As you can see, pulling them down to this point has made it a more focused brush, just like our sharp push brush here. If we increase the strength there. But obviously you can play around with this and just get different sort of effects. And that's just playing around and setting up your own brush. And then obviously you've got the radius and the strength, and you can add in an image, which we have done here. This is just going to show you what an alpha does. All this is done is pointed to a JPEG file. On subdivide, subdivide. And as you can see, as I paint, just subdivide the model again, just to increase the resolution down there. You can see we're getting that logo. Now it's coming out a bit blocky probably because of the resolution of the model. Turn radius on and off. There we go. So that's made it a bit bigger. And then we could just use our smooth brush just to soften those. But that's a very basic alpha. As you can see, it's just good for imprinting just that extra bit of surface detail, specifically sort of repetitive detail, where it would take you a long time to build that up. So that's pretty much the introduction to the brush editor and the paint displacement tools. We have our basic tools here, our basic default brushes. We have our curves which we can adjust to tweak those brushes, and we also have our very basic settings for adjusting the radius, the strength and the focus. Now that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in this. So now you've had a glimpse of the tools we're going to use from here onwards to help sculpt our model. What I would do if I was you is I'd play around with these, just get yourself familiar with the tools, and then what we'll do in the next lesson is we'll bring in our main model and we'll just start to sculpt.